Arts and Public Life for offering me the space to be able to bring this exhibition to fruition. As I said before, my name is Ciera McKissick and I'm the curator of the exhibition. Tonight, we're joined by three of the artists who are featured in the exhibition. We have Shonna Pryor, we also have Janelle Ayana Miller, and we also have Kevin Demery, who will be joining us today. I'm going to share my screen so that I can tell you a little bit more about the artists, walk you through some of the imagery from the exhibition as well, and then we'll dive into some questions and conversation with the artists as well. Again, thank you so much for joining us on this almost 90-degree weather day. I know it's hard to compete with the sun, especially after a month of rain and no sun. So thank you to the folks who are joining us this evening. Okay, let's see. Okay, I'm gonna put this in presentation form, blue slideshow. Awesome. So the exhibition is called Relic. And as I said before, it took me about 2 years to think through bringing this exhibition to fruition. The image that you see here is an untitled piece, also named as Okra by Janelle Miller. And this is kind of the focal point for the work in the show for the flyer. I loved the imagery that our graphic designer, Richie Parks, came up with. He really took all of the concepts and inspiration that I put forth and really made something that was visibly a relic and something that spoke to the show. There was a lot of inspiration and conversations and ways to use each of the artists' individual objects that they presented in the show to be present in some of the imagery, which is a lot of it is featured on the complimentary website that I also built, which I'll show you all a little bit as well too. But the exhibition was inspired by a billboard by an artist out in Pittsburgh called There Are Black People in the Future by Alicia Wansley. And I had seen this image come across on social media a bunch of times before, not really knowing what it was tied to. I'd seen it in different references and just the idea and thought, and really begged the question with myself, what would we see when we get there? What are we going to leave behind for Black people in the future? And what exactly are the relics of our time? I was thinking a lot about cultural artifacts and things that are ubiquitous to Black culture, especially in a day and age where there's a lot of cultural appropriation as well. There's a lot of Black trauma oversaturated in the media, and you don't really hear a lot about culture from Black people. And I wanted to specifically pose this question to each of the artists in the exhibition and have them present forward relics that they wish to leave behind as artists and also as Black people living during this time and space. And a lot of what I was thinking about as far as the exhibition, I know it says relics of today, but I was really thinking about how Blackness and how time and history really oscillates between many different points in time and space. There's past that influences the present and also influences the future, and it's very cyclical. And I feel like you can't be in one space without seeing and being a part of the other spaces in time as well too. So I was thinking a lot about that and currents and how we are able to evolve, but still be tied to our past in some way. So that was really what I was thinking about in the concept for that. I'll tell you a little bit about Janelle Ayana Miller. Janelle is the grandchild of the Great Migration, a Midwesterner with Southern inflection. Her practice is rooted within familial and communal aesthetics, looking deeply into bridging self and time as an act of placemaking while using modes of collage, found objects, film, food, and photography as well. Janelle will be talking to us tonight about her work, and she also has a program coming up this Friday, and I'll tell you a little bit about that later. We also have Kevin Demery, who is an interdisciplinary artist from the San Francisco Bay Area. He holds a BFA from California College of the Arts and an MFA from the School of the Art Institute. In 2018, Demery received the Municipal Art League grant from SAIC and participated in the Artist in Residence program at both the Bemmy Center for Contemporary Arts in Omaha, Nebraska, and the Acre Residency in Steuben, Wisconsin. He has exhibited work both nationally and internationally at the University of Chicago's Arts Incubator before, Atlantic Contemporary Art Center, and the Art Berlin Fair in Berlin, Germany. He also is quite the busy fellow. He has another show currently up, and I'll let him tell a little bit about that. Opened the same night as Relic did in Chicago. And then, last but certainly not least, we have Shauna Pryor, who is a conceptual artist, art programs producer, and educator at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Her multidisciplinary art practice inspired references to food theory and its peripheral objects and concepts as a sociocultural lens to examine the politics of identity, memory, power, and play. Afrofuturist-based science, technology, engineering, and mathematic aesthetics are apparent in the visual language of these expressions. Her work has been exhibited in major cities in Chicago, Detroit, and New York, with esteemed artist residencies at the Hyde Park Art Center, High Concept Labs, and Chicago Council on Science and Technology. Her community engagement and outreach collaborative programs with established organizations and institutions have been instrumental in employing visual art to encourage young people towards STEAM futures as applied to a just and equitable society, which definitely makes sense in reference to some of the topic and theories behind her work as well too. We also have, not joining us today, we miss them, but they are present in the gallery and in the space. Rhonda Wheatley is also a part of this exhibition as well as Abigail Lucien and Laquila Brown. I'll show you a little bit of some of the work kind of as you flow through the gallery. I'm not sure how many folks have been able to actually come to the gallery and see some of the works that are present. This is work here by Laquila Brown. They're called Still Lifes with 7 gold impressions and Still Life with 8 gold impressions. And it's a work made from plaster and acrylic. And this is really kind of the crux of me beginning to build this exhibition. I came across this work as I was on a residency panel review for my former job. And I always save work that I like over the course of going through applications and return to them after. And I was really, really struck to this work in particular. Laquila makes these pieces and they literally look like they could have been excavated and dusted off by an archaeologist. And I was really thinking through what a lot of these objects represent. For those of you who don't know, if you know, you know, these are door knocker earrings and they're really ubiquitous in Black culture, also Latinx culture, but also have origins coming from Africa as well too. And I just loved how some of them really spilled from the plaster and some of them were direct imprints as well. Some of them have a hand that touches within the work. She's also been doing impressions of different food objects like collard greens and corn, and has grills and chains and things that literally look like they are parts of the body that have been excavated from the ground. And in my conversations with her, she was talking a lot about what it would mean to be in a culturally rich space, or what would a Black museum of sorts look like. If you know or have been to the Art Institute, there's multiple rooms with like Renaissance things, artifacts, things from all different cultures. And this in particular really struck me as something that was spoken to the cultural time and place of mainstream culture within Black history, also with ties to its roots as well. And I was really just drawn to that, and being able to see an image and be able to directly recognize it really spoke to what I was thinking through with this exhibition. The exhibition is for Black people entirely, but that's not to say that others won't be able to enjoy the show as well. But I feel like a lot of the pieces in the show, if you see the things and recognize them from our culture as Black people, you will understand the work a bit more deeply than someone who doesn't come from that cultural background. And I feel like these door knocker earrings are a part of that as well. I mean, they're selling these at like Madewell and like Urban Outfitters and things now for like $30+ and things, and you can go to the beauty supply store and pick up a pair of these. So it's just very interesting conversation about how these things have started off and almost become mainstream part of the culture, so much that you forget what their origins are coming from. Let me see. This here is work by Abigail Lucien. They're a Haitian artist who was also raised in Florida. And a lot of the work that you see here is very whimsical and very, very object-based. The piece is called Vanity. The piece with the swan, the Florida water, there's a matchbook from Haiti as well. And then there's a bronze rope to the right of that as well. I was initially drawn to Abigail's work because of her work with iron and with bronze and its roots to African workers within that realm, and what it really took to begin to have conversations about iron, and how the even discovery of iron was a colonization as well. If you don't know that history, it's very interesting. They talk about how certain things had to be destroyed in order for iron to be excavated and to be used as well. And also in reference to my former job, there was a 3-in-1 comb that we were giving out to people as a part of our membership package, and thinking about the makeup of who has access to be able to donate the amount that was at that level to be able to receive this comb, thinking about how people would recognize its actual usages. It would be like a person having a pick who didn't have any recollection of what an Afro pick meant or what it was for or its function. And I was thinking a lot about that and what it meant to have things in the hands of people that came directly from a culture that is completely outside of their own, and what it meant for it to be within that space. So I began to have conversations with her about that work in particular. And this is some of the newer themes that she's thinking about, but a lot of the work in general, especially her iron work, is thinking about concepts of labor, is thinking about what it means to take an act or an object of pain or trauma, like bronze sculptures that were being brought down around the country during the uprisings, and what it means to turn that into an object of care. A lot of her work also works with cocoa butter and shea butter, and there's a video piece in the exhibition as well where she's kind of cradling this large block of cocoa butter. And that is really speaking to this act of care that we as Black people are deeply rooted in, as well as the object directly being something that we use intimately within and of ourselves as well. Here is Rhonda Wheatley's work. Rhonda Wheatley wanted people to know that there were people here making magic, and that spirituality was a very important part of her life. A lot of her work specifically works with energy grids, and it's called Ritual Ranger for Opening Manifesting Portals. She does these altars in various different spaces that combine crystals, foliage, also clocks and radios and antennas and things that are no longer in function, but she uses them and thinks of them as a way to communicate with our ancestors and also with people in the future as well too. And she was recently in this space doing tarot card readings for people as well, which happened to fall on a new moon and a solar eclipse. So I think that that was very fitting for her practice as well too. And before I dive into some of the work with the artists who are here presently, I do want to just acknowledge the artists and have them say hello. And I'm curious about what is a relic that you all have seen recently, whether it be in society or culturally, something that you passed by that stuck with you, that you're sitting with? Yeah, that's my off the cuff question. And Janelle, I see you kind of ready to hit something, so I'm going to start with you.
I actually been thinking a lot about, hello everyone, my name is Janelle, and I've been realizing I'm been like amassing kind of this collection of like different objects and material that have like really very much like foundational to my arts practice. And one of the things that I've realized more and more is like my grandparents' house being a site of relics and reverence. So my grandmother's curio cabinets growing up have been like mental relics for me. And then the objects that have been passed down from those curio cabinets to like each of the grandchildren and have been spread throughout the house that used to live in this one collective house, now kind of like are a house of like memories. So I've been sitting with the ideas of curio cabinets.
Yeah, I love that. What about you, Shauna? Any relics you've come across lately? Oh, you're on mute.
Of course, I do it every time. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Shauna. I would say the relic that I'm sort of sitting with right now are tablecloths. So that has become a big part of my practice, sort of looking at these objects as a portal, past, present, future portal. I think of it as, you know, a conduit to a safe space. Information. In my artist statement, I say something to the effect that with each spreading, information, memory, experiences are disseminated and recycled. And so I think the tablecloth is the object that I'm sort of sitting with, my relic.
Awesome. And I think that's a good kind of full circle moment because Shauna and I met up years ago at SAIC and talked specifically about her work. And I was really, really drawn to the work from the tablecloths in particular, because she described them as like what conversations are held around the kitchen table and what seeps into the tablecloths. And she collected them, stains and all, and just thinking about what lives and remains within them. And I also was thinking a lot about that within the exhibition and the Carry Me Memes project with the kitchen table series and whatnot too. So yeah, definitely a great relic to think about. Yeah. And last but certainly not least, Kevin, what relic are you sitting with?
Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin. I think for me, I've been sitting with the lack of relics that I've been encountering. I mean, I think about Black cultural ephemera. Like there's many things that come to mind, you know, like whether it be Jet Magazine or, you know, any number of things that would be culturally, you know, nuanced and specific where you would see it and you immediately recognize it. But I've been more taken aback at how much I feel that it's a part of the experience of having subjugation in your narrative, that everything is always new. And therefore you're always hitting the reset button. So recently I was looking for a vintage Pan-African flag. I wanted to find one that was at least 1970 or prior and could not find one. And I remember being so astonished, thinking that if it was made in the 1920s, where did they all go? Mm-hmm. So that's what I'll drop into our conversation for now, the lack of relics.
No, that's a really interesting side to take as well too, thinking about what is taken from us and what is also washed away within the experience that we go through and what we can't find also. And I think especially people who have histories that have virtually been erased and whatnot, for me, a relic that I've been thinking a lot about are these family photos that have been passed down to me. My mom had a huge box of like images from my grandmother that she was given back after she passed. And I've been kind of sifting through those and looking at the different images and people that I don't know. And we were having a conversation recently about how we're reconnecting with different families on different sides, from like my dad's side, my grandfather's side, like other grandpa's side, and just how ubiquitous family has been in our lives as of late, and how we don't know a lot about who these individuals are. And she shared this image with me last night of two people that she inherited this beautiful like antique image of from my grandmother's side of the family, but she doesn't particularly know who they are, what they did or anything like that, and can like kind of show it a little bit here. And we were just talking about what it means to kind of archive these images. How do we clean the images? Can I talk to an archivist so that we can like get it in tip-top shape? So I thought that was really cool. And I've been working a lot with collage and like found family images within my own practice as well too. So I think that family is kind of one of the first relics that we think of, especially you, Janelle, talking about your grandmother, and a lot of your work is inspired by her, but also thinking through what extends beyond that as well, culturally as family too. So Thank you guys for sharing that bit. I want to hop into one of the questions as well. So I'm thinking a lot about legacy. I think when we're thinking about Black people and we're thinking about family and we're thinking about the rich cultural background and history of our lives, legacy is a really large component of that. And I would love to have you all just talk a bit about legacy and having autonomy over our legacy and what that means to you as a Black artist or Black person who's making work specifically about Blackness and Black people. And Kevin, since you're on my screen, I'm going to have you go first.
That's cool. I'm used to kicking it in the back. Okay, so thinking about legacy, I think the immediate thing that comes to mind for me is the ability to archive, and how we as creative practitioners have the opportunity to not only create the relic that represents a culture or facets of a culture, but then the ability to then say, how do we preserve this? So I feel that when you say legacy to me, I feel that we all have an overwhelming responsibility to find a way to have our relics interact with one another, and in particular outside of institutions that do not that don't have our origin in mind. And I think about people like Noah Porfoy, for those who are aware of that artist, and he created an outdoor kind of museum for himself in Northern California, I think. I remember the other person who created the Underground Museum, his name was Noah. I don't remember his last name, so maybe somebody could fill that in for me, but.
Noah Davis.
What was that?
Noah Davis.
Noah Davis, yeah, who unfortunately is no longer with us. But also a Black artist who created their own museum. I think that it's, and of course we have the history of the Studio Museum, but I think that the future of legacies for us, and I hope I'm answering your question, but I think that it's important for us to remember that a relic is just a part of it. It's just one facet of it. And if we leave our legacy up to established institutions, right, to be the only guardian or keeper of those objects, they will ultimately be out of context. And this is, you kind of can see it evinced in things like having to go to London to see most artifacts from places like Nigeria. It has its own history, but it's out of context at that point. So that's what I'd like to start this bit.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that we have to be able to have some sort of control over how our stories are told, and how, like you mentioned, preservation of those things as well. And thinking a lot about how a lot of these institutions are now returning objects back to the cultures that they initially stole them from, and how that's going to evolve how we see ourselves, and also what we learn about ourselves in the process of that as well. And these Black institutions that were created by people for that very reason, to be able to hold on to some aspect and autonomy over our stories and our art and ourselves as well too. What about you, Shauna, when you're thinking about legacy as an artist and what it means to you as a person?
So I think about this iconic saying of standing on the shoulders of persons who came before me. And so with that, that's the creation of a legacy there. That's sort of the template, and that's who passes the baton on to the next generation. So I think it's, our forefathers are really important, legacy. I just think that this group of people is forming and creating the template for what we're doing, how we're moving forward, any semblance of progress that we're making. We had to refer to that template in order to move forward in the best possible way. So I like to think of my work as sort of a relic or a template for generations in the future when I'm no longer here. So that's sort of what I'm striving for. I think it's super important. And I honor the people who came before us, whose shoulders that we're standing on.
Yeah, definitely, especially in your work, Wallpaper of Respect, which we'll dive a bit deeper into, but it dates all the way back to the late 1800s. So that is definitely the oldest relic within the show as well, too. Janelle, what about you? How are you thinking about legacy and autonomy within your practice, your life?
So legacy went in my own personal practice, and I'm starting to realize like legacy as far as how as I just view it overall, like you don't have real control over it, you know? Like when the day that I'm gone, I don't know what's going to happen to any of my artwork. I know that maybe, hopefully it will like resound with a person who witnessed something or like saw a thought, like felt some energy or connection to it. But then it's up to whoever comes after me to pick up the pieces and to kind of like recreate what was existing before, right? Like I think a lot about how even performance-based work within museums is very much like the ephemera of it, but not necessarily like the energy that was present when it was actually happening and participating. So even kind of like looking at my own like research practice with my own with my genealogy history, like it's a fragmentation that like I'm mapping and putting together. And that doesn't mean that I'm incomplete, but it means that there are pieces that people will experience, but they don't experience it fully. And even I myself, you know, am who people choose to see me as. So I think legacy is up to people and not necessarily up to myself to define.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And that really piggybacks off of something else that I wanted to ask you all about relics being ephemeral and like in fleeting moments as well. So how do you feel as an artist to be creating work and releasing work into a time where things are really fleeting and in constant motion? Thinking about the book Black Futures that like chronicled everything that happened on the internet as well, and like thinking of how the timeline works and how artists are expected to kind of pump things out rather than sit with the work and with their practice. I'm just curious to how you think of your practice in that regard as well in such a fleeting time.
So the more I realize it, it's not a sprint. This is an endurance race. Like being an artist is a life's work. So I've never felt the need to pump out work or like make it feel like it's relevant to other people. Cause at the end of the day, like my experience as like a Black woman will resonate with those who feel connected to it. And I feel like it's, you know, it's like an echo, you know, that it resonates with those who it's meant to resonate with.
Yeah, definitely. And how about you, Shauna? Especially, I think that you're an educator as well. How are you thinking about making and releasing work, not just for you, but like in with an artist also?
Well, for me, I'm going to go all Afrofuturist on you. But for me, I mean, you know, for the Afrofuturist, time is a construct, you know, everything that from the past, right now in the present, in the future is already there before you even get to it. I feel like we're the ones in motion. And so in creating something, it's, you know, it's sort of, I sort of think of it as maybe like the sun, in that it's stationary and we're sort of the earth, we're revolving around the sun. And so in making these objects, you know, I'm thinking about it in that frame of mind, that it's this thing that inspires you to ask questions and to dig deeper. And so it's there, it's going to be there long after I'm gone. And so, you know, this perpetual cycle and motion of persons who are exposed to it, you know, they get to experience it. They get to experience it in their own way. They get to mine it. And, it serves as a document of, whatever was happening at that time. And so for me, I don't see it as something, as the object being the fleeting thing or the moving thing. It's the thing that that is perpetual, and we're the moving things that are experiencing it. So, yeah.
I like that perspective, flipping it on that as well. Kevin, how about you? How are you thinking through that within your practice?
Could you say the questions one more time?
Yeah, so the question is, can you talk about what it means to create work and release it into time, where time is relatively fleeting and in constant movement, especially as Shauna put it, our work, your work is the relic itself.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. Yeah, I get that. But I think about that we cannot divorce our relationship to our work and relics to the way in which we consume. So I think about this idea of that we're in a world that has been irrevocably, shaped by consumption. And particularly being an American artist, I think about that I'm in constant battle with that, right? And so for me, I personally think that it becomes a relic when I think about that the context in which I'm making this will at one point no longer exist, but can the object continue to exist, right? And almost always we've seen that in visual art, that is the case, that the context, the people, the societies will wash away. But in most cases, and I believe particularly with the materials we're using now, they will exist long after we are long and gone. So I think I'm similar to Janelle. I think I'm always thinking about that. I try not to say, and is this relevant? I try to say, does this resonate? And almost always, I think when we're true to, that's why I always kind of refer to the work as Black cultural ephemera, right? Because in a way, it's something about when you see something from I've seen magazines from 1974, right? That's more my mother's era. But then I go, I feel that. I know her, I feel that. But then I can see something like that photo you have. And I say, I feel that because we're in a cultural continuum, being that we came from these people and we will have people in one way or another who came from us, whether literally or just culturally. So I know in that way, the work will always have life.
Yeah, and I think that really speaks to the works in the exhibition. A lot of them are ephemeral pieces as well, or pieces that have been put forward within different exhibitions, but in different iterations of them as well, and they've evolved and shifted over time. Or like Janelle and Shauna's practice, where they're repetitive things, a study, something that they come back to time and time again. So with that, I'm gonna share my screen again and dive into some of Janelle's work here. Specifically with her church bands. We can talk a bit about that. So Janelle's work is called Building Virtue, a Study, and she's been doing this series since 2017 till now. And I think my first encounter with this work was at SAIC at Holman Square in the hallway of the place, and I was just so drawn to them. I grew up in the church. We've all seen a church fan or two, but I had never seen church fans like this before, with all Black people in them and the imagery and the Technicolor and just the way that the different formations have been done also. And I would love just to hear Janelle talk about, one, the title, what does Building Virtue a Study mean? And how did you start collecting these church fans? And why was it something that you wanted to do? I know we talked about a little bit about this in our collectors conversation. Homer show at Southside Community Art Center, but yeah, I'm curious about this specific to the show.
Yeah, so Building Virtue, as far as the title, to kind of encapsulate this collection, because to me it's an ongoing work. I'm thinking a lot about the imagery of these photos and themes, and there tends to be a investment and images that are happy or angelic, that talk about family values, whether it's a mother taking care of a son, pouring him a glass of milk as after he plays a baseball game, or maybe going out to a baseball game. You know, fathers reading books to their children in bed, children holding Bibles, looking towards the sky, or little boys with dogs. And I feel like for a Black person, seeing these images, oftentimes during the civil rights movement, you know, the era of anti-lynching, these are images that are idyllic and hopeful and resonate. And most of these fans on the back tend to actually, we associate them with church fans, but it's really interesting because most of them are in relationships to businesses, with the predominant businesses being mortuaries, funeral homes, and life insurance policies. So you kind of have these businesses that are oftentimes want to rely on your business as well. Like juxtaposed with these images kind of have a duality to like a Black experience. So I got mesmerized in the sense of like, not only is this image very beautiful and hopeful, but there's a business on the back. And it's oftentimes tells the story of like Black entrepreneurship and business, as well as the idea around community and family life. So I feel like there's such a rich tapestry to this work, as well as thinking about them as traveling billboards in themselves. Like these were business billboards, these were ideology. My words are not leaving, but ideally, you know, billboards. Like I feel like that's one of the main reasons why this drew me to this work and me collecting these pieces. And the start of this collection, and particularly in 2017, is I've always loved looking at these types of images as a child growing up, you know. So I think realizing that I could amass a collection that spoke to such a larger story and history is one reason why I've kept it up to this point.
Yeah, and like I had a conversation with people. People are very drawn to this work within the gallery as well. And I think what you mentioned about like this idyllic image that we're seeing here, there's even like little taglines on them that say like a happy pair, like Sunday school and things like that. It was happening during the civil rights movement, especially too when Black families and Black people were trying to assimilate into culture to make them be deemed as, to lack of a better word, like a good Negro, or like we're just like kind of imagery. And I was having conversations with people about that who really teased out of me, and was thinking about what that means, especially at the very top of the display here. We have the image of the Black family at the very top of this totem that we've created. So in thinking like what these images represent, but on the flip side, what the church fans have also been used over time, they've evolved even more so into these acts. You don't see images like this. There's been replaced with branded logos or different things, mainly to advertise business. But I like the take that you mentioned on, you know, promoting Black entrepreneurship, promoting Black life. But I would be curious to see how you think the idea of what they represent has kind of evolved over time, and what it means to have this thing that's been instilled in time and space. Like a lot of people are like, what happened to these people? If you think about it, some of those children are older as well too. And thinking about the types of businesses people had also. I was thinking a lot about that. Where do you find these church fans, you know, like, I assume they've just been hard to find.
So I found these church fans actually mainly on eBay.
Oh, the consumption.
Yes, mainly on eBay, and it's secondhand sites, as well as like I have been gifted them because people know I collect them. So, you know, whether it's auntie, family, friend, or you know, friend, and it's interesting because I think what Kevin mentioned, like as far as the Pan-African flags, and like you think that it would be an object that maybe would be like more readily accessible. And then this is actually similar. As I was going through websites like eBay or like trying to, you know, find these fans, it's so hard. It's like picking a needle out of the haystack, right? It's like, what does it mean that I'm getting like over 1,000 hits for white families and pictures, you know, of white Jesus and and like, but I'm not getting an image of these family units. It's like, it's also like the consumption, like maybe there's like, I'm always thinking about who's the other person also looking for this imagery on the other side of the computer as well, or even at an estate sale, if we think about it like that. So it's like the hunger for these type of relics is very real. And then it also, one person may make it $55 for one fan. And it's like, where does the value come in too? It's like, how much do you want this? Do you have the income or capability to buy into it too? So I think a lot about that as well. Yeah.
Are they like Black people that you're buying them from? Or like businesses, or yeah?
I can tell like based off of, I can't always tell based off of like who the seller is, based off of their like identity, but sometimes based off of like objects that they do collect. And a lot of times based off of like antique and real estate dealers, you know, I'm sorry, antique dealers and estate dealers. Like I most of it is run by white people en masse, you know, so.
Yeah. So that's like a whole nother layer to the conversation of you like trying to find this imagery, collect them for your own historical purposes and whatnot, buying it from a white person and putting money into their pockets in a sense also, but you're buying it back, to buy the culture back in that way too. Yeah, that's an interesting kind of conundrum there also. I'm also curious about how you choose different backgrounds for pieces. I know that this one in particular was inspired by church stained glass windows, and I don't know if I have the image here. Yeah. Studies for building it. This is the imagery that you kind of sent over. There's white Jesus, unfortunately, but just thinking through how you come up with these different formations and how you present. Or in the past, there's been houses, different colors. Like, what draws you to a specific color or specific shape, and how you wish to display the work, and how does that evolve the work?
I tend to like gravitate, I think, towards iconography that like reminds me of, for this particular piece, that remind me of the church, like the stained glass windows, of course. But then also thinking about like windows as like sites for like viewing in, or allowing in light as well. And then the color palette, I tend to resonate with colors that remind me of like Easter dresses, like when I was a kid. So like those like soft lilacs or lily greens, color of water. So there's very much like an interest in color palettes that like remind me of my youth. Mm-hmm. And realizing that a lot of the images deal with like children particularly. So thinking about like mirroring that as well.
Yeah, and I think it also speaks to the conversations and the fans themselves. Like, even the types of color and the so technicolor. Like there was one of the fans that with the little girl with the hat and bonnet on, like that color almost perfectly matches the brightness of the blue that it's on as well too. And I don't know that things are this colorful or bright these days as well. Kind of lost a little bit of that. But I'm also curious about your other pieces and work in the show too, thinking about how you're thinking about displaying pieces like these ochre pieces, or thinking through the fans, the functional objects. There's kind of this inherent collective Black knowledge that comes with things like church fans, ochre, and labor in reference to the oven mitts that you would culturally know if you were exposed. How does this impact their resonance to you and how the viewer do you think?
So for me, I feel like a continuing thread is like everything that I do is in relationship to my family histories and stories. So with the okra, I was thinking about casting these objects. And when I originally did the casting, I didn't know what I was going to do. But the first thing that popped in my mind was okra, because it just has such a beautiful form and shape. And then the place that I casted them in was in rural Wisconsin. So I ended up going to a Amish or I feel like they were Amish. I'm sorry if they weren't, but I feel like I went to an Amish farm and bought okra from their farm. And I thought it was so fascinating that it was their first year growing okra and they didn't know how to cook. They were asking me like, oh, how do you cook? And I thought, the way that plants have traveled to locations where it's not even culturally significant to them. And thinking about like the culinary history of okra and it as a crop that came with us on the transatlantic journey here, I think about the resilience of it and the importance to capture that resiliency, even though this may not look like the okra that first started planting, of course, with genetic modifications or selective growing processes. It made it, and me casting it spoke to the importance of that, and in its relationship to me as well. And as far as the oven mitts, I did those with family archival images, and thinking a lot about like labor in the kitchen, the history of like Black domestic work, labor within my own family, and then thinking about food as a source that could be as much about paying for folks as it is about nourishing and enriching those who you love. So I feel like those objects like encapsulate that interest. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think that okra also shows up in this piece as well too, along with some other objects that are found in this closer up image of them. And just the response that I've been getting from different people, talking to the historical resonance of okra, and also hearing people from other backgrounds and cultures bringing their take on okra also. They're like, oh, we cook this in our community as well, but it has a completely different meaning, a completely different meaning behind it also. So, and then there's also you either love it or you hate it, how it's cooked essentially. I had a group of older women talking about how they hated okra because it was slimy and like how someone taught them how to eat it. And then hearing you talk about these people kind of growing it, probably because it's like this popular thing that people are talking about. Again, like this appropriation even of food, and how that trickles down into it. But people don't necessarily know the real deep roots of it. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think I appreciate about okra, you know, it's not meant for everybody to, you know. And I feel like the people who, you know, like it really love it. And I feel like I like things that are either very much for you or not for you.
Yeah. You also want you to make so they're like, I want to give these to my uncle he's always on the barbecue. Like we can like stuff. So I think it's like really resonating with people, like especially with the imagery or like how you can adorn it. But I love that you've incorporated some archival family imagery on there as well too, along with these objects as well. The next work is by Kevin. And this piece is actually forgot to change sorry about that, the caption on that. This piece is called Shell, and it is one of the most ephemeral pieces of the show. I feel like it looks like it could have just washed right up onto the ground within the gallery space. And I would love to hear you, Kevin, talk a bit about your journey to finding the hoodie within this work, and also how you've collected the shells. The work specifically talks to the Black male experience in particular and martyrdom. We had a lot of conversations about that also, but also the materiality of it and what it means for something to break down and represent another. We talked about calcium, we talked about chalk outlines. And I specifically placed this image within the window of the gallery so that people could see it when they walked by, just to get that kind of passerby or like double take for people also, thinking about how you encounter these things within the streets and how it feels to encounter it within a gallery and institutional setting also. But I would love to just hear you talk a bit about this piece, Kevin.
All right. Well, let's see, where do I begin? I feel you described it all the way. I will say, so I guess to the journey of finding this piece is called Shell. I had a studio in Berkeley, California, and it opened right up to the street. It was a storefront. And I walked right outside one night and I saw this little tiny, it's an American Apparel hoodie, and it's in the American flag scheme, or the Union Jack. And I was immediately drawn to the scale of it. If the dimensions were there, it would point out, you know, it varies, but it's small hoodie. It's a child size hoodie. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I began to think about the idea of body and how we represent bodies. And I kept thinking about it at that particular point. And I think this is something that unfortunately us as, you know, African people in America, we're constantly thinking about death. I can only imagine it's ubiquitous across the African world, but in many regards, because of police brutality and constant death of youth, as a result of that, I kept thinking about a body that had evaporated. Mm. This naturally drew me to water. And in the same regard as talking in the same way Janelle was speaking about okra, I was thinking about the transatlantic slave trade and thinking about bodies evaporating into water, hundreds of thousands of people being packed into small spaces. And so this poetically began to be a way for me to investigate the idea of what would that body look like if it had been truly evaporated. And so the reason why I titled it Shell is that these shells, they at one point were living in many regards. They were living organisms, and now we have a relic left over of what that creature was, or what that living entity was. And so in that way, that's how this piece came about, making sure that something could sit as a place marker for the death of a human being.
Yeah, and I'm also curious about like where people are very curious about where you've collected the shells as well. And I think that just the hoodie in and of itself, it being a child's hoodie and it already having the stars on it and thinking about Black men in America as well. And your other piece also speaks to this idea of like the American dream and whatnot. And someone pointed out to me that you're the only male in the show, and thinking about what we've been showcased in society, especially with trauma, thinking about the Black male death and how it's positioned more so than the death of Black women also, and how it started these movements and people have been marching lately for that. I wonder, how do you interrogate that also within your work in thinking about what it means to be a Black male and present this work also that is referencing that martyrdom of them?
I think there's two parts in my mind to what you say. I think first I'll speak to the idea that engendering death is a dangerous concept for many reasons. While statistically, yes, you can look at it and Black men and boys are killed in many ways in alarming rates. So in that sense, I think that is something to highlight. But it speaks to the ways in which bodies are positioned around cultures of gender, right? And how the fear of a Black male and the proposed sense of violence or threat that they pose directly feed into that. So that's the one facet, I would say. The second bit about how I see it in my work, how it manifests, how I think about it, is that when I say it's a dangerous concept, it's because it's speaking to as if these deaths aren't affecting the community as a whole.
Yeah.
And it's alarming to me when we hear such things as if the visibility around death is important for the potential to advocate and stop it. But it's speaking to this idea that, well, now we're so accustomed to death. We're so accustomed to our people meeting an untimely end, and usually in many cases for unjust reasons, right? I mean, that now we advocate and say, well, who do we know dies more? You know, and I think about that. That's when we go. We need to combat the death entirely, right? So when I'm making these, yes, I am a Black man, and I speak to those experiences, but I'm thinking about the Black body metaphorically as a whole, right? There are works that I make that aren't in this show that speak specifically to that engendered experience. I have a series of wind chimes that do that. But in the case of this work, I think about it, that ghostly form is to really speak to that the loss of life in our community in general is something that is unfortunately across the board, irregardless of one's gender identity.
Yeah, and I was going to talk about the form of the piece as well. Like, it's very like meticulously done, and watching you install the piece and how it seems like it's like smoke smoldering also. Like, there's so many different things that come to mind. There's a fluidity in it as well. And I wonder how you kind of came to that point of positioning it in that particular way. Like, were there other formations that you explored in the process of making this work? Has it evolved or changed? Where you put the shells, or certain places are more weighted than others? Really just curious about that too.
Yeah, I'll be quick on that. The thing is that I wanted it to be not about a body staying solid. Bodies do not. They decay. They become organic matter again. So in some ways, I'm referencing what we would think of as a spirit, right? In the same way that you maybe think of the shape of a heart. It's not really that shape. It's more so that will evoke the sense of a spirit, but also the idea of formlessness. So when I'm shaping it, I'm thinking about a form that is once tight is slowly starting to lose shape or deplete. So
yeah, that idea of formlessness and weightlessness also. And then we go into this piece here, when boys are birds and men are soil. And this image in particular is a scene from Boys in the Hood. It's been interesting describing that film to people who don't necessarily know it, because it's a really pivotal scene in the film, when Ricky passes away or is shot. And a lot of people are resonating with it in particular. And I would be curious, one, to hear about the title of the piece, and then why you chose to do the production on the drum head in particular too.
Yeah. So this one, I think, is a good example. So when you're talking about this idea of gender as it plays into it, I was thinking about that moment. So for those, I mean, I'm sure we have people who have seen the film on this call and those who have not. This is a scene in which the actor Morris Chestnut, who's at the center, was shot. And he's the most promising young figure in some regard in his friend group. That's his brother, played by Ice Cube to the left, if he's on your left or right. And then Cuba Gooding Jr. is a neighborhood friend. And so the reason why I chose this scene is because it is a moment that felt very spiritual, watching it as a young person. And the scene, particularly this moment where they hold him, where he's covered in blood and he's lost his life, it felt as if it was a crucifixion in some way. And how you charted the experience of these young boys, the movie follows them, or at least has a montage where they're young boys trying to understand their world within a very tumultuous and contentious environment. And then they become young men who have become in some ways desensitized to it. And when this character, Ricky, meets his untimely end, there's a sense of dread that someone almost made it out of these terrible circumstances these young men find themselves in. And how this is a motif that you see constantly. That for those who don't know, Ricky was going to be a football star who was recruited for a fancy college. And his brother, who's played by Ice Cube, is caught up in criminal activity, and his friend is a bit aimless. So there's this relationship to that this one young man who has a promising future has now become the victim of that environment. And I put it on a drum head because I thought about that sound, that loud bang that you hear, and you know his life is over immediately. That was extremely stark for me. Oh, it was interesting. I'd never seen it without, or at least I have seen it, but not in the context of like an artist talk. Yeah, so I found this worn drum head, and it was just immediately when I saw this kind of opening that came as a result of wear and tear, that I felt it was a good poetic statement for the environment in which they lived, and also a way to talk about the sound of that death, so that you could relive that moment and then have it be positioned almost like a Renaissance painting.
Oh, I love that. Thinking through the sound that it makes also, and like the drum in and of itself, just as an object, that is also a relic. And I like how you just happened upon a lot of these things in the practice of your work also. I'm also curious about what you were talking about in particular in reference to this idea of him almost like falling from grace. Is that what you were alluding to with the title of the piece itself? And this is our first time showing it on a wall specifically. It's normally placed on top of a glass table also. So thinking through the process of viewing also.
Yeah, so I guess to say the title, right? The title is to reference that there is where I see a lot of engendered violence for young men who are of African descent is the sense that you go from being a non-threatening and almost kind of, for lack of a better word, consumptive entity. You're cute, you're adorable, you're a boy. when you begin to encroach upon manhood, whatever that looks like, whatever that means in the cultural context in which you live, you begin to become more threatening. Right? Maybe your sheer stature, maybe your sheer, whatever projections are being put onto you, which you may not identify as of your own. And so in making this piece, this is around the time, the first time that I put it together, I was thinking about so many young kids like Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, headlines calling a 12-year-old boy a 12-year-old man. And this idea of that manhood sanctions you somehow, and only in that context, but sanctioned them for death, that they were prepared to die. So the idea of when boys are birds, the idea of being a boy is the chance to spread your wings and to exist in some state of freedom, and that men are soil is that you are prepared for death.
Wow. Wow. Thank you for sharing that, Kevin. Yeah, thank you. Next up, I wanted to dive into some work by Shauna Pryor. It's right when you come into the gallery space, I was really adamant about wanting to build this wall specifically for the piece. It is also called Wallpaper of Respect, the Gold Freedmen. And I would love to hear you talk a bit about why you chose to work with this material and how you happened upon these ledger papers from the Freedmen's Bureau Bank. These date back to 1870. It's interesting to see like something that is literally a relic that's standing before us. It's public use, it's public record, and these are some of the first Black entrepreneurs. But you also posited them next to this idea of the Wallpaper of Respect, which is a mural in Chicago that celebrated Black people and Black leaders as well. So I would love to hear you talk a bit about how you juxtapose those two concepts together.
Yeah, sure. First of all, I came across this imagery through my interest at the time. There was a conversation that I was attuned to around reparations. And so my research led me to the National Archives, where I found these bank ledgers from the Freedmen's Bureau Bank, which, side note, I didn't know about the Freedmen's Bureau Bank. So I was just, flabbergasted. I'm like, why don't I know about this? Like, I'm fully Gen X, like why am I just now learning about this? So that really struck me, and so I wanted to definitely work with this. Within those ledgers, I found an excerpt that specifically had an individual with my last name, my surname. And so that was just sort of the extra connection there. And I just wanted to in the context of the Wallpaper of Respect, these individuals in my mind, just as in the Wall of Respect, those were our Black heroes. It was the first mural here in Chicago. Like, it was the first mural that started the whole mural culture and documentation of the mural culture, Wallpaper of Respect. And so it was paintings, portraits of our Black leaders at the time. And so in my mind, these people, our ancestors, were under such incredible, unimaginable duress, and they were still able to eke out some sort of, savings that they could bequeath to their generations, their family generations. So this ledger is from the, like I said, the Freedmen's Bureau Bank, which is a bank that was set up by the American government over a period of 3 years. And this particular excerpt, as you said, is 1872. It was around that time for about 3 years. And so these would have been sharecroppers who did make a very meager pay if, most of the time they didn't, of course. It would have been our first Black entrepreneurs. It would have been recent Black Civil War veterans. So if you think about all the Black people, because of course you couldn't commingle the monies. So, and this bank had branches throughout the United States. So if you think about this sheer volume of persons, and in today's monetary value, I read that it would be around in the billions. So if you think about that in the context of another case for reparations, I just thought it was super interesting. Yeah, I had fun doing it.
Yeah, and what I really love about the work is that you left on the edges of the pieces. There's many different formations of this work. Also, there's a silver one, there's a black one, and we came to choose the gold one in particular. And then there's also this number pattern that's also on the back of that. Can you speak to that for folks who don't necessarily know how that's in conversation with the actual ledgers too?
Sure. And so the vertical orientation is actually from the ticker tape, and it's all of the, well, not all of it, like a few of the mined corporate businesses. And so that sort of points to this notion that the wealth of this country, how we played a part in that, how we sort of was the foundation through our free labor of the wealth of this country. So I was very conscious of the section of that excerpt that I mined too. And so there's like Google there, H&M, there's, who else? There's a multitude of them, but I think those are probably the most recognizable two there. And so, yeah, it just points to this idea of how we were building wealth in more than one ways, whether it was something that we were doing for ourselves or something that, we had to do for other people.
Yeah, and this work is completely different than your other work that is present in the exhibition, which really speaks towards the future and like Afrofuturism, what you were talking about a bit earlier. Care package for an Afro migration to Mars, left turn past 2 moons, you will know. There's 2 pieces that are present in the exhibition, and the idea behind them is like, what objects or things would you take with you if you had to migrate to Mars? Specific to you, Shauna, can you talk a bit about how you came to this work and how it's going to evolve over time, and like how you chose the objects as well? People have been really, really curious about the piece.
Sure, I'm really excited about the interest. So first of all, I'll just mention that my overarching theme in my artistic practice is food. So food, identity, memory, power, and play. And so anything that points back to that, whether it's specific or indirect, that's sort of the premise. And so the wallpaper of respect was more under the umbrella of my bread cheddar dough series. This one, how did I come across this? I was at the time, the Mars rover, not the rover, the Perseverance, Mars Perseverance had gone up. I think that was last year or year before last. And so there was this sort of excitement around that and this idea of colonizing Mars that Elon Musk and some of the rich guys were talking about. And so I just thought about that and in the context of being a woman, being a Black person. And I asked myself, if I were making this speculative trip to Mars, what are some of the things that I would take to protect and preserve my body, mind, and spirit? And so that particular line of thinking was connected to my reaching out to the food scientist at NASA who shared her scholar papers with me. And my question to her was, you know, how do you choose the food stuff that goes on these trips for the astronauts? And I kept coming back to this notion of this vacuum sealing technique that is used to protect and preserve the foodstuff. And so that's why I use the vacuum form technique in this instance. And so just having fun with it and thinking about, you know, what would I take? Almost like a desert island pick. So it could be fun, it could be speculative, it could be practical, it could be serious, political, and just having fun with it, asking my friends, you know, sort of getting other people in on the idea of it. So what are some of the things that you would take? And so this is the result of it.
Yeah, no, I really love that. And I would love to see like an entire room of these based on different perspectives and whatnot. And I know you have some things coming up around that. I also want to take some time to ask any audience members if they have any questions specifically for the artist within our last couple of minutes together here. We did have a question from Denny. Denny, thank you for being here. So the question from Denny is, how does inheritance inform the show and the practices the artists are engaged in? We're talking about thinking of inheritance as both an object, skill, or memory that is passed down between peoples. But yeah, feel free if anyone else has other questions. There is a Q&A part of the webinar that you can put your question there, and feel free to drop it in the chat also. But I'll repeat the question. How does inheritance inform the show and the practices that you are engaged in as artists?
I can answer that first. In terms of my work and inheritance, I mentioned the fact that in specifically the Wallpaper of Respect piece, that these are ledgers and they are direct bequeathments and very specific inheritance. And so part of the information that is filled out in these ledgers asks, you know, there's a section that says remarks. And so, you know, you just sort of put the miscellaneous in there, and almost all of them made some reference that if anything happened to them, you know, if they should pass away, that they wanted to leave whatever the holdings that they had in this bank to, you know, a mother, a sister, you know, a spouse. And so that was a very explicit and direct bequeathment. So yeah, that really resonated with me as well.
Yeah, especially with seeing your name within the piece, like were you able to dive into any history or look up the person, or do you have ideas about how to engage with that a bit further?
You know what, there's the option there. This is sort of, there are 7 persons that are listed on this ledger, and that option is definitely there to sort of dive into it. I felt the connection in terms of the name itself was enough for me. I didn't feel compelled to like confirm anything one way or the other. The name was just sort of a connection with me, other than the obvious reparations and that. So yeah.
Definitely. Kevin or Janelle, did you guys want to answer the question about inheritance informing your practice, or thinking about the work that you're engaging in with memory?
For me, inheritance is foundational to the work and the practice. I feel like, you know, we're building blocks of DNA, of lineage, of stories, of culture, and everything that makes us, that we acquire to this point, informs that inheritance. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's, especially with you talking about your grandmother and where a lot of your influence comes from, it's a lot of it stems from inheritance and the memory also. What about you, Kevin? Oh, you're on mute. Don't lose it.
That's my first time doing that. I think about it in terms of, and this is perhaps an echo in the way I make work, but I think about the lack of inheritance that we typically have as Black people. Like when you talk about the Freedmen's Bureau, I just think about like, yeah, that money was taken. You know, like we need to explicitly say that because it's not any fault of our own that those billions aren't here today. And those type of things, I think, have not always been fully articulated to us in our generations, right? So much so that one of the narratives that drives the work I make is seeing the aimlessness and almost loss and feeling of lack of understanding about these histories within our respective youth cultures across the African diaspora. A lack of understanding where is our wealth, not only financially, but spiritually, culturally, all those things. Sometimes we're steeped in wealth, you know, where I know some people like, you know, somebody who's from the G's Bend kind of history in South Carolina, right? And that they really feel like I grew up in an African village in the Americas. And then I know people who literally grew up and felt they had no culture. Mm. And what does that even mean? And that's a continuance that you hear with young Black people. So I'm constantly in my work thinking about the lack of inheritance and saying that things like what you're doing, this exhibition's just for you. The work I make, not all of it, but in the context of some of those pieces are literally made just to speak to people who experience it and may never buy it, you know? So that's how I see inheritance in the work.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm gonna make sure we get to. There's two other questions too. One from Bimbola, Akimbola. Hi, Bimbola. For those who work with family memories, how does the creation of an art piece change your relationship to the memories that inspired it? Does it shift the weight or emotional response? And in reference to her experience working with really emotionally charged objects and photographs, almost neutralizes the memory. And she was wondering about your experiences specifically.
I'm out of this one. I don't work with family members.
Yeah. I think, Janelle, you talked about the oven mitts using some archival family imagery. Maybe you can speak the most to this.
And just a quick question. Did you say secretion?
What?
Secretion?
No.
Okay. I was like, wait a second. I was like,
how does the creation
of
an art piece change your relationship to the memories that inspired it? Does it shift the weight or emotional response or neutralize the memory?
I feel like it to me, it's like I feel like working within the family archive is not a neutral thing. So I feel like, you know, a lot of times thinking about like what are the lack, you can think of it like what is the lack of stories that have been passed down, have been told, what are the stories that are not being told for reasons of either past traumas, whether someone doesn't want you to have access to it. So it's interesting to think about what narratives I'm adding on to existing like archives and like reinterpreting it and like based off of what access I do have in relationship to a place, a site, a source, an ancestor. It's like rebuilding a relationship, maybe with someone who I never even knew, but the impact of them resonates with a family member, and then through them, they continue on. So if that speaks to the question.
It definitely does, especially like thinking through these people that you don't necessarily know, or like even Shauna saying she was drawn to the surname as well, but what is carried beyond that, like inherently within the story that's been told. Oral history often comes to play within those, like, who are you hearing about these images from, or are you just inherited an image and you have no recollection of it? Also speaking to Kevin's point. So yeah, I think it all touches on that.
Yeah, I would say it definitely does not neutralize it. And I was going to mention the name, that the surname in the Wallpaper of Respect piece. It connected me even more so to the story and the history. And then in terms of the tablecloths that I collect those from family, friends, eBay. But I'm always, you know, it's super special. It's super special anyway, but coming from my family, it's really it really adds another level of preciousness to it. And you know, I'm even like, well, don't wash it, because, you know, leave all the food markings, because that's part of the history, that's part of the story and part of the narrative. And so just being in some of those spaces at the time where these food markings were made, it really takes it on another level for me.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that also. I think we have time for one more question. I know we're at 7:30, but this one speaks to what's next. So this question is from Nalani McClendon. Where is your work taking you next? Are you using these same topics or are you diverging? And if anyone has anything that's coming up or that they're working on or exhibiting, feel free to plug that also.
Shameless plug?
Yes, we love a shameless plug. Shauna,
I'll go. Okay. So I have a solo show coming up at Evanston Art Center next year, though. I have some things that are in the works that I want to sort of hold off on until everything is confirmed for later on this year. I'll be doing I'm preparing to start a public participatory project online through social media, where I will be asking my followers, people who I'm following, you know, what are some of the things that they would take on a speculative mission to Mars. You know, if there were 2 items, you could only take 2 items, what items would they be? And so I had such a really good time, you know, with my close circle, coming up with things. I would get calls at midnight, like, you know what? I'm like, I'm sleeping right now. I don't even know if I remember what you just said, but I've really been having fun with it, and I wanted to share it with the public. So Shonna Pryor is my Instagram, and I'll be launching it through Instagram within the next couple of weeks. So I would love it if you all participate.
amazing. Yes, I'm so excited to see this project evolve and shape shift also. What about you, Kevin? You had another opening the night of, but if you could speak to what's next or what topics you're thinking about in your work also, what's current? Oh.
Let's see it. They now tell you when you do it. I was gonna say I'll make this a quick twofer because my good friend Shaniqua asked about the emotional process. So I'm shipping off work in about a week and a half to a solo I'm doing in Germany. That's entitled Menagerie, which is essentially it means to keep animals or even people on display, and it's a word that was used to be tied into zoology. And so where I'm going next is thinking about the speculative processes around trauma and even the aspects of entertainment around trauma, right? So that's really going to be evident in a lot of the new work I make. I had a show that opened up that didn't deal with that at the same time at this place called the Charlotte Street Foundation the same day we opened. But moving forward, I'm going to be thinking about that. I believe many of us, particularly in the context we're in the Americas, are so desensitized to the violence we see now on the internet, and in particular Black death, because this history is there. The history of making a speculation out of it and making an entertainment is there. So I will be diving into that. And I'll be doing a new residency, which I'll announce soon. But that will be a place where you'll see a lot of that. So I'll put, or hopefully maybe I can get some help on it, but my Instagram is weighted by gold. There's underscores in between, but I will be updating on that as I go.
Awesome. And I'm also curious, you don't have to speak to this now, but what it's like to create this work in different contexts and like have it be presented in other countries where Blackness has shifted or it comes from a completely different lens, depending upon where you are geographically too. So yeah, I'm really curious about that. We'll talk about that offline. Janelle, what's next with you? How are you thinking through your process?
So what's next for me is I think I'm going to have a little bit of a rest. I was thinking about it. I was like, I need like just a little bit of a reset, but I feel like I have ideas that I'm thinking about, but I want to sit on them and just dive a little bit, and just rest on them. As far as shows that are currently up in Chicago, please come and see me this Saturday for a collection play at Relic. And also I will be, I have work up at Drama Club, which is a part of Acre Projects. And then that show is up till the 27th, and it's called Kicking the Can. So
yeah, it's so exciting. So I want to see that show too.
Yeah.
So, definitely. Yeah, definitely come see Janelle this Saturday. She'll be present with more fans from her collection, and people can move through them as well. Gallery hours are from 3 to 7. And yeah, thank you so much. I wanted to also briefly just share the website, just so folks know. The complimentary website is an extension of the exhibition as well, where you can dive a bit deeper into the artists and the work. There's an essay that I wrote that speaks to the work that's presented in the exhibition. You can read that in full on the website. There's a map which serves as a relic from the exhibition itself too, artist biographies, and you can kind of see some of the imagery that the designer Richie Parks had that we used as ephemera to complement the website. And then this page in particular, you see that top billboard that inspired the exhibition, but this is things that I listened to during the process of making the show come to fruition, things that I was thinking about. And I've also been adding other relics that I've come across from other artists who aren't necessarily in Chicago or part of the exhibition as well too. And I've been updating those every week on Thursdays or Fridays, so people can dive a bit deeper into different things. Ironically, the person I was talking about, Air Jordans, the person who designed those just passed away, but they weren't a Black person, but ubiquitously in culture became so heightened with Michael Jordan as well too. So that also is another layer to the conversation about what things are created for us, not necessarily by us also, and what kind of conversations come across from that. So make sure you check the website frequently. I am updating it. The website is relic.info. But yeah, thank you so much for being present with us here tonight. Thank you so much to all of the artists for being a part of this exhibition and sticking with me for 2 years and helping me bring this to fruition. I'm really, really excited. We have just a little bit under 3 weeks left of the show. Gallery hours are Thursday, Friday, and Saturday from 3 to 7 p.m. And we will be doing a closing reception on May 27th. And there will be a DJ. Sadie Woods will be DJing. It's from 6 to 9. I'm thinking of the body as relic and music as relic, thinking about sound. So we're also accompanying the closing with a dancer who will be thinking of body memory and what it's like to hold on to those, and thinking of the body as a relic. So make sure you come and check that out. But yeah, thank you so much to everyone. Go outside and have a beautiful rest of your evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Cheers, everyone.